going to do a quick segment called Generic Wrestling Questions. Those of you
Okay.
that have seen my interviews before will know where I'll ask Garrett his favorite match, favorite pay-per-view card, such as Double or Nothing 2019, his favorite wrestler's entrance theme, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Basically,
Okay.
the questions I assume you might be asked on social media or in live streams. So now you'll have a place to be like, guys, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
For the longest time, it was Austin and Bret Hart from WrestleMania 13. Like I
Hmm.
thought that was like the perfect wrestling match that I'd ever seen. And I think the last Omega Okada match did actually beat it out the long one. There was just something about that match where I was like, I finally had this idea of like I'm holding on to this Austin Bret Hart match, and I think it finally, in my mind, beat it out. So that would be my answer.
What about your favorite overall pay-per-view card?
I always lean to All Out 2021, which is where Brian Danielson and Adam Cole came out at the end of the show.
And
Now,
Punk debuted, and
Punk's first match, I think, was on that
yeah.
show. So the reason isn't because I thought it was the greatest in-ring wrestling show that I've ever seen, but what it felt like in that building, being there live, was I kind of looked around all of the entire arena, and we all kind of looked at each other at one time, and we were like, this feels more important, doesn't it? Like they really hit a home run with this show, and it almost felt like wrestling had changed from that moment. And what we would learn, it did, and soon thereafter, it would change in the opposite direction because of CM Punk and Tony Khan and the Young
Mm.
Bucks and such. And so that I'm sure I could think of shows that had better matches, shows that felt bigger. Like you always go back to WrestleMania 17 as like the greatest WrestleMania of all time. But being there live probably changed my perspective on what the best pay-per-view is. And I would go with that.
What about your favorite wrestler's entrance theme?
Oh, it's gotta be Austin. Austin 316. That there was going back to that time frame, like you think about it. Sometimes even more today, people will put these theme songs like in their phones and listen to them like you would listen to normal songs. Now, I wouldn't do that, but I just remember back then thinking like outside of watching TV
Mm.
wrestling, how do I listen to that song again? And then you have to buy the WWF CDs and this and that. But I think that song is, you can go back to like Real American as well, the Rick Derringer song. And you think of what iconic moments are based around the wrestling music. And like
Mm.
those two just pop right off because I know what I feel when I hear those songs. And it's like, it's a very positive feeling.
What about your favorite tag team?
This is a harder answer because tag team wrestling is not like tag teams don't normally have long careers like solo
Mm.
wrestlers do. At one point in my life, I may have said the Steiner brothers, but the Steiner brothers really stopped being the Steiner brothers in like the late 90s. Like
Mm.
they're not a tag team anymore. It's Scott going solo. In another time, I may have said the Road Warriors. They were the most unique, craziest, like badasses I'd ever seen growing up. I'll probably go back though a few because when I was like 9 or 10, the British Bulldogs really they stood out to a different degree than almost anything else I was seeing. And even though Dynamite gets hurt and the end of the British Bulldogs is even sooner than the end of the Steiner brothers, it almost felt like because that ended and I wasn't ready for that to end, all it did was leave me wanting more. And
Mm.
like in my mind, the Bulldogs still had another two or three runs in them and that I never got to see. And that's the thing that stays with me, I think.
Mm. I understand what you're saying completely there. And then finally, Garrett, the biggest generic question, in my opinion, who is your favorite overall wrestler?
Yeah, that's a tough one. For the longest time, probably until I was in my, late teens, it would have probably been Hogan. Like that's who brought me to the game. That's who brought me to the dance was Hogan. Uh, but then, very similar to the Bulldogs answer, I think it's got to be Austin because I remember reading about early Steve Austin, and I actually found, I think the first ever mention of Steve Austin in the Observer was in, I think it was, I want to say it was October of '89 as Steve Williams, and Dave writes that he's an up and coming prospect.
Hmm.
So if I'm following him in the magazines and I see him show up in WCW, and I knew everything about him because I'd read about him so much. And he comes in with Lady Blossom, and then there was even a valet before Lady Blossom. But to see the trajectory from WCW in like '91 through him coming into WWE, what Steve Austin was, and I think if people don't know his career and they only know him as Stone Cold, what they
Hmm.
don't realize is Steve Austin was the guy who all of us wanted to be a bigger star than he ever was in all of the companies until mid '97.
Hmm.
Steve Austin was like the one that everybody wished would get pushed more. So think about, I don't know what wrestler that is today that we can kind of compare that, but pick a wrestler
Mm,
in AEW or WWE who you're just like, I just wish they would go all the way with this guy.
maybe Eddie Kingston, maybe.
Eddie Kingston's a great one. Absolutely a great one. They're different ways that they kind of were brought up, but it's a great one because I've said the same thing. I want to see the 1999 Mankind run with Eddie Kingston. I really
Mm,
wanted that, and it didn't happen. Maybe it still will happen, but think of how you think about Eddie Kingston. That's how we thought of Steve Austin in
mm,
'91, '92, '93, and then he really gets unfortunately jobbed out when Hogan comes into WCW. And so then he goes to WWF and he's got this wacky $1 million character, and you're just like, okay, he's nothing. Like they're not going to do anything with him until he changes the trajectory of his own career. But when he goes away in 2003, you're just like, there's so much meat on the bone left.
yeah.
This, like, we deserve as wrestling fans, we deserve 5 more years of this guy because he is that special. He has that much connection with the fans, and we never got it. Which then you fast forward to WrestleMania 39. You asked me earlier how I watch wrestling. There are pockets of moments where things can kind of override my sense of journalism
Mm,
in wrestling. WrestleMania 39, Austin and Kevin Owens was one of those moments where I was like, I don't care if I'm supposed to be fair or the way that I look, my own self-imposed rules, right?
yeah.
I'm just gonna let this thing rock, and I'm just gonna enjoy it, and I'm not even gonna think about criticism one way or the other.
That's a really, really cool and a beautiful way to end this, Garrett.